I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My phone buzzed constantly, notifications piling up like little punches to my chest, each one a reminder that I had been forgotten. My brother's wedding was happening this weekend, and I hadn't received a single invitation. Not in the mail, not through a text, not even a casual message from my parents. I stared at the group chat where everyone was congratulating him, sharing pictures of dress fittings, and excitedly planning seating arrangements, my name nowhere in sight. The hollow ache in my chest grew heavier with every post, every celebratory emoji that didn't include me. How had I been so invisible, so easily dismissed? I replayed every family gathering in my head, the subtle favoritism, the side comments, the moments I had been overlooked. My stomach twisted as I scrolled further, seeing snapshots of cousins, friends, and coworkers being invited, all while I sat there with nothing. The sting of humiliation burned, but beneath it was something sharper, FOMO. The cruel realization that I was missing out on an event meant to celebrate someone else, leaving me behind in a world where I didn't matter. My fingers hovered over my phone, unsure if I should text, confront, or just accept the cold truth. Every instinct screamed at me, but I stayed frozen, letting the hurt wash over me. The images and messages blurred as my mind raced, each one a reminder that this wasn't a simple oversight. They didn't want me there, and somehow that made the pain even worse. As I sat alone, the sting of exclusion from the wedding began to merge with memories I had buried long ago. I remembered birthdays when my brother received extravagant gifts while mine were barely acknowledged, his accomplishments praised while mine were dismissed as insignificant. I had learned early that my family's affection came in uneven doses, measured by how well I fit into their ideal image, and I had always come up short. Flashbacks to high school awards nights, college graduations, and even simple family dinners haunted me now. He would be showered with compliments, his successes posted proudly on social media, while I quietly faded into the background, the quiet sibling who tried too hard yet was never quite enough. The comparison was relentless, and every slight felt like a confirmation that my place in the family hierarchy was fixed, predetermined, and ignored. Anger bubbled alongside the hurt, twisting with every memory, every conversation where my thoughts and feelings had been minimized or laughed off. I could feel the familiar weight of invisibility settling in my chest again, and it made the exclusion from the wedding sting even more sharply. I had thought I had moved past these moments, that adulthood might bring balance or recognition, but seeing the invitations and celebrations unfold without me proved that nothing had changed. The resentment simmered, growing into something heavier, something that demanded more than just silent endurance. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about every overlooked moment, every unspoken slight, and the realization that I had been underestimated for far too long. I didn't think. I just booked the ticket. My fingers moved on autopilot, selecting flights, scrolling through hotels, choosing the one that promised privacy and distance from everything familiar. The thought of staying home, surrounded by reminders of my exclusion, felt unbearable. I needed air, space, a place where no one's judgment could reach me. The confirmation email landed in my inbox, and a small flicker of excitement mixed with my lingering humiliation. FOMO still gnawed at me. I was missing the wedding, the pictures, the laughter. But the idea of escaping into a world where I could be anyone, unseen and untethered, had a magnetic pull. There was also a subtle thrill in imagining myself away from my family's rigid hierarchy, away from the constant comparison to my brother, away from the expectations that always made me feel inferior. I packed lightly, taking only the essentials, but mentally I carried the full weight of every slight, every overlooked effort, every time I'd been passed over. The journey ahead felt like more than a vacation. It felt like the first step toward reclaiming something I didn't even know I had lost. Sitting at the airport, waiting for my flight, I realized this trip might be the turning point, the place where I could finally confront not just my family's favoritism, but my own power to change the narrative of my life. From the moment I arrived, everything felt different. The air was lighter, the streets unfamiliar, yet alive with possibility. On the first evening, I wandered into a small cafe tucked between colorful buildings, and a conversation sparked almost immediately. A fellow traveler struck up a chat, noticing the quiet intensity in my eyes, asking what I did, where I came from. For the first time in a long time, my words mattered. They listened, really listened, and their curiosity made me feel seen. Later, at a local art gallery, an older woman approached me, commenting on how I noticed the subtle details others overlooked. She shared stories of her own struggles and triumphs, and I felt an unexpected resonance, a connection that whispered I had potential beyond the family's narrow definition of success. Even strangers in passing exchanged nods or smiles that carried recognition I hadn't felt in years. Each interaction chipped away at the insecurities I had carried silently for decades. I realized I could hold space, command attention, and inspire respect, all without trying to compete or please anyone. Empowerment began to bloom quietly, a gentle yet insistent reminder that my worth wasn't dictated by invitations or comparisons. I started journaling the moments, capturing the warmth, the laughter, and the small victories, each one reinforcing that I belonged somewhere, anywhere, beyond the shadow of my brother's spotlight. It was in these encounters that I sensed a shift, the first subtle stirrings of a transformation I hadn't dared imagine before. On the third day of my trip, I wandered into a small networking event tucked away in a local co-working space, the kind of gathering I would have ignored back home, convinced I didn't belong. But here, in this unfamiliar city, I felt a flicker of boldness, the kind that comes from knowing no one has expectations of you. I listened more than I spoke at first, absorbing the conversations, the laughter, the energy of people chasing dreams and building empires. Then someone approached me, a man in his late 40s with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, and asked what I did. I told him briefly, almost casually, and something in his expression shifted. He invited me to sit down, asked probing questions, and genuinely seemed impressed with my insight and experience. By the end of the hour, he offered a freelance opportunity that could pay more in a month than I had earned in the past year. My heart raced as I imagined the possibilities: financial independence, recognition, the ability to stand on my own terms. I left the event buzzing with anticipation, my mind spinning with plans. The idea that I could now rise above the family's hierarchy, perhaps even outshine my brother, was intoxicating. For the first time in years, I felt that my future wasn't tethered to their approval, that I could create my own stage, write my own narrative, and step into a version of myself they had never acknowledged. The trip had already transformed into something far more than escape. It was the first step toward a reversal I hadn't dared hope for. As I lay in the quiet of my hotel room that night, the city's lights twinkling outside, I couldn't stop thinking about my brother, the wedding, and how easily I had been dismissed. Memories flashed unbidden, him being congratulated for every achievement, while my efforts were minimized or ignored. The sly comparisons, the whispered favoritism, the way my presence always seemed optional. The sting of exclusion from the wedding wasn't just a single slight. It was the culmination of years of being overlooked, of being made to feel invisible. And suddenly that hurt sparked something else: motivation. I realized I wasn't powerless. I could turn these feelings into action, using the skills, insight, and newfound connections I had gathered to quietly assert myself. I began sketching ideas in my notebook, small moves that would elevate my status, highlight my competence, and let the world, and my family, see what they had underestimated. Subtlety was key. This wasn't about screaming revenge, but about demonstrating my worth in ways they couldn't ignore. Each plan, each potential encounter, filled me with a thrill, a sense of agency I hadn't felt in years. The pain of exclusion had become fuel, and for the first time I felt in control of the story, ready to shape it to my advantage. The evening of the event arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. Walking into the room, I was surrounded by confident people who seemed untouchable, yet something in me had shifted. I no longer felt small or invisible. When conversations began, I listened carefully, then spoke with clarity and insight, offering perspectives that drew nods, smiles, even laughter. A few influential figures leaned in, asking follow-up questions, genuinely interested in my ideas. I could feel the subtle shift in energy around me. People were noticing me in a way they hadn't expected. I shared a story from my own experiences, carefully highlighting my resourcefulness and perspective without bragging, and the response was immediate: admiration, curiosity, respect. For the first time, I sensed the beginnings of a reversal, a small but undeniable proof that I could command attention, influence, and social power on my own terms. Each handshake, each laugh, each word exchanged was a reminder that the narrative of my life didn't have to be defined by my brother's shadow. By the night's end, I left feeling energized, validated, and quietly victorious, knowing this was only the first step toward reclaiming what had been denied to me for so long. A week into the trip, the opportunity I had stumbled upon began to take shape in ways I hadn't dared imagine. The freelance project I had been offered turned out to be far bigger than expected, connecting me with clients whose influence and resources I had only dreamed of. Every email, every contract signed, every acknowledgement of my work felt like a tiny triumph, a quiet assertion of power I had never exercised before. I imagined my brother at his wedding, surrounded by applause and celebration, completely unaware that I was quietly building something far more substantial than he could anticipate. The thought sent a thrill through me. This was my chance to shine from afar, to assert my worth in a way that he could never have predicted. My heart raced as I pictured the moment when my progress would intersect with their world, a subtle display of success that would make them pause, reconsider, maybe even regret their exclusion. Every small victory, the praise, the payments, the connections, felt like pieces of a puzzle snapping into place, creating a picture of empowerment and revenge that was as satisfying as it was strategic. I realized the emotional payoff of this wasn't just personal pride. It was the anticipation of a reversal so understated yet so potent that it would leave them questioning everything they had assumed about me. The suspense of what was to come made every day feel electric, every interaction a stepping stone toward the moment when I could quietly and powerfully outshine the brother who had dismissed me. I never intended to make a scene, but the opportunity to assert myself arrived unexpectedly. A video call with extended family coincided with my latest accomplishment. A client had publicly praised my work, and I had just closed a deal far beyond what anyone in my family could imagine. The call started casually, catching up on life and sharing pleasantries. But as my camera picked up a glimpse of my new workspace, my trophies, and the subtle symbols of my recent successes, reactions shifted. My brother's smile faltered. A pause lingered where confidence had been. I mentioned a recent achievement lightly, almost offhand, and the group went quiet, processing the implications. Their murmurs, the sideways glances, the quick attempts to mask surprise, all of it fed a thrill I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but the message was crystal clear. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked, and now I had quietly risen above it. The realization that I could wield influence, impress others, and subtly highlight their error without confrontation made my heart pound. That night, I reveled in the first true taste of karmic satisfaction. The brother who thought I didn't matter was suddenly reminded that I did, and in a way he could neither ignore nor control. The next few days were surreal. Messages began trickling in, some congratulatory, some hesitant, and a few tinged with envy. A cousin who had always dismissed me sent a note asking how I had managed such a feat. Even my brother reached out, his tone careful, attempting casual conversation. But the undercurrent of surprise and perhaps regret was unmistakable. Social media mirrored the effect. Friends and acquaintances commented on my achievements with admiration, some even expressing disbelief at how far I had come. I read each message with a quiet, simmering satisfaction, feeling the power of being recognized on my own terms, without needing to argue, explain, or defend myself. It was a validation I had longed for, but had never begged to receive. I realized that empowerment didn't require confrontation or loud declarations. It could be subtle, effective, and deeply satisfying. Watching their reactions unfold from a distance, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, replaced by the warmth of karmic justice, the sense that the scales had finally begun to balance. The humiliation I had once carried was replaced with quiet pride and the knowledge that I had reclaimed my narrative on my own terms, and that feeling was intoxicating. A week after the wedding, I decided to host a small, exclusive gathering for a few close friends I had met during my trip. people who now formed a network I could truly rely on. It wasn't meant to compete with the wedding, but as invitations went out, I realized the scale and prestige of the event I had unintentionally assembled. Guests included influential figures, clients, and mentors whose respect and attention naturally elevated the evening. As conversations flowed, I shared updates on projects, milestones, and collaborations, never boasting, only recounting achievements in a way that revealed the full scope of what I had accomplished. The energy in the room was electric. Laughter, curiosity, and admiration hung in the air, and I felt the subtle shift in perception taking hold. News of my gathering inevitably reached my family, carried by mutual friends and social media posts. I imagined my brother hearing about it, the contrast between his lavish wedding and my quietly impressive success. The thought brought a soft, satisfying smile to my lips. I realized the power of understated vindication, the way I could outshine him without confrontation, simply by being myself and demonstrating the results of my perseverance. By the end of the night, the feeling of triumph was undeniable. I had taken the humiliation of exclusion and transformed it into a public display of personal growth, social influence, and confidence. This wasn't just revenge. It was the affirmation of my worth, a victory that needed no acknowledgement from anyone except myself. The realization that I had shifted the narrative entirely, that my brother's oversight now highlighted my rise, left me glowing with empowerment, content, and finally, fully vindicated. As the night wound down and guests departed, I sat alone for the first time in weeks, letting the quiet sink in. I thought about everything that had led me here. The repeated neglect, the exclusion from the wedding, the years of being compared and overlooked. And yet, sitting in this room filled with evidence of my own accomplishments and the respect I had earned, I realized something profound. My self-worth had never depended on their approval. The power, recognition, and validation I had longed for were not gifts my family could give. They were things I had to claim for myself. Memories of old wounds softened as I understood that resentment and humiliation could be transformed into motivation and growth. I felt a gentle pride in the person I had become, someone capable, resourceful, and respected, regardless of family recognition. The catharsis wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying. I allowed myself a small, contented smile, knowing that my journey had reshaped me, that I had finally stepped out of the shadow of favoritism, and that I was free to define my own worth on my own terms. A few days later, I received an unexpected message from a mutual acquaintance who had attended both my gathering and the wedding. Apparently, my brother's friends had been whispering about my success, comparing the quiet elegance and influence of my event to the ostentatious yet hollow wedding celebration. He hadn't realized the impact of excluding me, and now the news had reached him through channels he couldn't control. I imagined the subtle humiliation, the way he must have shifted in his chair, how he would feel the sting of being outshone without a single confrontation. Even my parents seemed taken aback, perhaps regretting the blind favoritism they had exercised for years. I didn't have to lift a finger. The realization of my achievements had done the work. The satisfaction of seeing them confronted with their own oversight was immense, a quiet, delicious revenge that required no spectacle. The FOMO, the recognition that they had missed out on including me, and the karmic justice all unfolded naturally. I sat back, savoring the moment, knowing that the scales had finally balanced, and that my subtle power had spoken louder than any argument or confrontation ever could. The trip was coming to an end, and as I packed my bags, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in years. I thought back over everything: the exclusion, the hurt, the subtle victories, and the moments when I had surprised even myself. For the first time, I realized that life wasn't about proving myself to those who had never truly seen me. It was about claiming my own space, defining my own success, and finding pride in the person I had become. I smiled quietly at the memory of my brother's bewildered expression, the admiration from friends, and the satisfaction of knowing that I had turned humiliation into empowerment. The journey had been more than a physical escape. It had been a reclamation of self-worth and agency. I felt gratitude for the lessons, the challenges, and the unexpected opportunities that had reshaped my perspective. As I walked toward the taxi, leaving the city behind, I knew I was stronger, more confident, and at peace. The past no longer had power over me, and I carried forward the knowledge that my value was mine to define, unshaken, unyielding, and finally acknowledged by the only person who truly mattered: me.